Hi, Eugene. How are you?
Hi, Jana. I'm good.
I'm great, great. We are doing now part two. We did part one of the queer theory and how it's kind of the history behind it. We did was it about 2 weeks ago? And it was an hour and a
Yeah.
half, and we got tremendous feedback on the comments on the video. So if anyone hasn't watched part one, it's on the Natural Women's Council YouTube channel, and we've had people ask for part two. To continue the journey on where this is coming from. And you've done a deep dive, Eugene, and there's actually part two, and then next week will be part three already queued up. There's so much information with it. So tonight we hope to keep it to 45 minutes. The last one was an hour and a half, so we'll try to do a little bit shorter. But if you want to take a moment to recap what we covered in part one, and then we can, everyone can go
Yeah.
back and watch that before we do part two. So you can just touch on what we covered, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. I think in part one we kind of it was to give a bit of a grounding on the whole notion of gender identity and also queer theory, because we will make references to those here in this video, and we felt it was important to give a sort of a baseline for people, that hear those terms and perhaps wonder where they're coming from. And also, particularly most people don't really know about queer theory at all, so they wouldn't really
Mhm.
know that term. And we will be using that when we talk about the two documents we're going to talk about, the two,
Mhm.
one from the WHO and one from UNESCO. So if people want to check that video out first, that might be good to get if you don't have the background and you
Mhm.
haven't seen that before. If you have seen it, then you're good to go, and you can join with us here. I think the other thing to mention to people is that the documents we're going to review now, they are available online, and this is going to get into quite a lot of detail, and people may
Mhm.
wish to download those documents and actually have them in front of them as we go through the video here. It might even help. And I will put stuff up on the screen, of course,
Mhm.
but that might be useful for people to do as well, to kind of go through the document with us and have it in front of them. So we'll have the links in the description as we always do, and people can download them and review them offline themselves, or as we say, follow along with us in this video.
That's
And
great.
we'll also have the section links in YouTube as well. So if people want to jump ahead, if they're interested in a particular
Mhm.
age group, maybe their children are a bit older perhaps and they don't need to go through the younger ages,
Mhm.
then they can just jump ahead to that and save a bit of time.
Okay, that's great. And another thing as well that our supporters and followers have asked us to do is have a place. I know we did the description field last time and you had so much information. We had over 10,000, I think, words, and we had to limit it down to 5,000 because there's just so much information and people are really, there's an appetite for where is it coming from. So our followers have asked us to build a website. So the website, we took the feedback, it's under construction, ready to launch, hopefully all going well in April. And we'll use that website to house a lot of the recommended reading, the books that you've read, Eugene, to do your research, the articles, the videos, documentaries. So we'll have a reference tab so everyone can have a point of reference all in one kind of one-stop shopping. So that will be coming very shortly as well, because you've done years of research on this and you've read dozens of books and everything. And the more you find out, the more there is to know. And it'd be really great for our supporters to see that information, because everything that you're going to convey to us is absolutely backed up with reference, which is really important. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
excellent. Okay,
So
great.
um, so I suppose we'll start kicking it off. Let me just put up the screen here and we can take a look at it. Let's put this into presentation mode. So just for today, we're going to be looking at the combined documents. It's WHO Standards for Sexuality Education in Europe. That's the document we're going to look at today from 2010. There's also a document, the UNESCO document, which is a newer document from 2018. We're going to look at that in the next part two of this particular session. And both of these, the kind of general theme here is comprehensive sexuality education, as it's called, or CSE. And we'll talk about where that comes from, etc. Now, there is a warning notice on the front here, and there will be some sexually explicit references. This is for education purposes, and so we're just saying that up front, but just there is a bit of a warning. Probably not as well. There's probably one slide on this particular deck which might take people a little bit by surprise. But it's no more than what it's no more than what children are getting exposed to in the schools.
Mhm.
In fact, it's an awful lot less. So that's just a trigger warning. Let me look at the breakdown here. So we're going to look at the origins of where this stuff comes from, because these two specifications are relatively recent, but there's a history here, and I think it's very important to go through the history because it kind of puts some context on what's happening now. And you'll see that when we go to talk about particularly the people who are influencing these specifications, the people who are involved in creating them. And you'll kind of see where the heritage kind of comes from. So that's quite important. And then we'll get into the document itself, and it's going to be detailed. We'll do it by age group. Some people have probably seen some of this in the past. Usually people see the 0 to 4 years of age, and it's kind of disturbing, some of the things you see on there. We'll cover that, and then we'll cover all the other age groups as well. So we'll kind of step through them so that people can see them, get familiar with them. We'll make some commentary between the two of us, I guess, Jana. And if there's something that's particularly relevant, I'll kind of call that out. But this is informational in the main for today. When we do the second stage next week, we'll be talking about the UNESCO 2018 guidance information. It's a little bit different, more up to date. It's formatted in a different way. So it is a little bit different, and we'll step through that. And really after that, then we'll get into a critique of the two documents. Now there is a critique that's been generated by Safe Schools Alliance in the UK. And we'll take a look at a summary from that, and we'll have the reference to that. And then there's some additional points I think that doesn't cover, and we'll talk about those towards the end, and the relevance then, how you connect that into what's actually happening in the curriculum in Ireland, not just in the curriculum, but also in information that's being made available from the HSE, such as the Busybodies book, for example. These particular specifications are quoted in relation to that, and we'll kind of see that now when we get going. So that's it. So there's a lot in this. So we've had to split it into two, but it is really important because it does underpin, I suppose, the guidance that's the international guidance on sexuality education, which is then obviously being brought into our own schools then as well, with other modifications. But these are the underlying documents at the end of the day, and they are referenced.
And before we start, Eugene, it might be
Okay.
good for people who don't know some people may not know who the WHO is. It's the World Health Organization. And the World Health Organization used to be years ago kind of just about health, but now, particularly with the WHO treaty that they want to have all countries sort of ratify in May, they want to take over health, food, farming, education, sexualization that we're going to talk about today, every aspect of life on planet Earth. So that's the WHO, the World Health Organization. And I'm not sure if many people, I don't know if you want to kind of give a brief kind of synopsis of who UNESCO is, what their part in this is.
UNESCO are a kind of they're a branch of the United Nations, focused on things like education, and things, children and that sort of stuff. So that's why they're involved in this. And you might ask, why are two different groups producing these things differently? And probably a valid question. But UNESCO, there is a bit of heritage here as well. So when we get into it, you'll kind of see who came first, and it's not quite what you think, actually. So when we get into the history, so UNESCO they are engaged in this type of activity in education. UNESCO have a whole program regarding Education 2030 for the United Nations 2030 kind of guidelines, which people might or may not be familiar with. So there's a whole lot going on associated with that. That's a whole other discussion for another day. And there's a whole wealth of documents and other material to talk about in relation to that. So, and that's what UNESCO, they're in the kind of education business. That's one of the things they're involved in, and sexuality education is part of that.
Yeah. Okay, great. That's great. Just for background for people who may not know who these two unelected global bodies are that are influencing our children's education.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get going. So there's a bit of a story here first. As always, we need to go through a bit of history. And I was talking about why this is important. So this is there's some redaction on this just for privacy reasons. And this is basically a letter back to a parent who had expressed concerns over some content in the Busybodies book. And this happens typically, there has been complaints like this. And in the case here, there's kind of the issue was regarding the gender identity elements that are in the Busybodies book. And they will then quote the WHO and UNESCO standards as best practice, and that they're basically just following those.
Mhm.
And we'll see that when we go through the document, because we'll see this stuff is in the document and is called out there. So this is why these documents are important, because they get referenced back to you when you go and complain about these things. And they basically say, well, that's it, that we're just following the WHO and UNESCO guidelines, and that's it, and end of story. So these documents have also played into the curricula for RSE and SPHE. And we'll see that as we go. And there's a lot of commonality in terms of the ethos as well. Now, these documents are only part of the story. There's a bigger story, but they're an important part of it, because they do form the basis and justification for what goes into the curriculum. These documents are available online. You can download them. They're to a level of detail, but obviously they're taken by a national education group and they're turned into an actual course with material that's used in the classroom. So this isn't material that's used in the classroom. This is the material that's used by the people who create the material that's used in the classroom. So if you kind of follow me, so they're not. So you won't see. This will talk about the high level themes and the learning objectives and that kind of thing. It's not going to be talk about the actual exercises and material that the child will see. That's different, and that's even probably more important to parents. But this is the starting point. So if you're not happy with what you see here, the chances are you're not going to be happy with what your child is getting exposed to in the classroom. So this is where you have to kind of head it off at the pass, so to speak. So hence it's important to understand what's in these documents. Okay, so we need to see how they evolved, right? So let's go back in time, and we're going to time travel back to the time of Alfred Kinsey. And some people may have seen the movie with Liam Neeson, 2004 movie, and it's pretty accurate, actually. It's not too far off the mark. This man was a sexologist. He founded the Kinsey Institute. They were funded by the Rockefeller Group. And he was big into the whole area and he was originally a biologist, but he got into the whole area of sex and gender, reproduction, etc. And he produced two books, The Sexual Behavior in the Human Male in 48 and The Human Female in 53. Now, the one in 48 was really well accepted, and that's really what made him famous. The second book probably wasn't as accepted as well. In society, people found it a bit of issues with it. These were the Kinsey reports, as they were called, and I guess he has influenced the whole area of sexuality and sex education, and we'll see that now when we get into the actual specifications. Now, there were issues. In his document, he documented, and one of his assertions is the whole area of human sexuality, and particularly the sexuality of children. And the table here is quite disturbing, and I'll talk about it and there's there'll be a link in the description to a whole video that talks about this, that interviews people who worked with Kinsey at the time. The data he got from a pedophile. Now, the pedophile actually used a stopwatch and a notebook while he was, raping the children. This is the only word I can use. And
Eugene, just to jump in there,
are,
if I look at the chart there, so if I'm reading it right, sorry, my eyes are tired today. Look, it looks like
it's shocking.
5 months. So he's talking about just
5 months, yeah,
5 months old and 11 months old giving a child an orgasm. And did he explain how he gave the children orgasms? Was this a pedophile who was abusing the children to bring them to orgasm at 5 and 11 months old?
Well, he was claiming they were having orgasms. That was his claim, obviously.
Wow.
I mean, the numbers, if you look at the numbers, they're pretty horrendous. The time involved was how long he was with the child. So you'll actually see one case down there where he was 24 hours with the child. This is actually really disturbing stuff to read. Now, Kinsey actually, this was a source of data that you couldn't get legitimately, obviously. How could you ever do this research in a university? So, and this guy Green actually he was very meticulous in the way he recorded his data, and Kinsey loved that. That's something he really loved in his career. But unfortunately, this came from a bad source, and the data really to interpret that this data is saying that children are sexual from birth and are having orgasms and everything. These children were being assaulted. They were in pain. They were crying out in pain. So that assertion, I think, is one of the big issues that people would have with what Kinsey's work came from. So this is disturbing, and this kind of underpins this notion. Now it's a kind of a Freudian notion as well, I guess, that children are sexual since birth. But where people are continue to use that assertion, I think it has to be questioned, and particularly if you're going back to Kinsey's research. So this it still had a huge impact. This research has impacted everything. There was a kind of a whole. It kind of was a sexual revolution, I suppose, kind of followed, and it kind of uncovered various sexual practices that people were engaged in. Again, there was some question marks because some of the data was coming from prison inmates. It was coming from prostitutes. So their sexual practices were going to be a bit different than the normal person, and that was kind of skewing the data. So there has been debate as to the extent of the accuracy of some of his data, for sure, quite apart from the child's data that he has. But he does have a huge legacy. There's still people who love him and see him as a very emancipatory character from a sexual perspective. But there's a dark side here as well, and I think we have to keep that in mind because we are talking about sexuality education for children now as we go through this.
I can't
Okay,
imagine any
let's move on
responsible
then.
mother or father
Yeah,
would be happy with knowing that someone thinks it's okay for an age
yeah,
5 or 7 or 8-year-old to be brought to orgasm.
yeah.
That's just so disturbing as a mother. I can't imagine anybody
No,
would
no,
think that's okay.
yeah. No, no.
Wow.
Those poor children they're just been violently abused.
Yeah.
So we now have to talk about the whole area of Margaret Sanger, and she founded the American Birth Control League, and she went on to ultimately found Planned Parenthood. And this really becomes important. You'll see this when we start talking about the documents, because Planned Parenthood, again, well, some of the background to Sanger, she was huge into the whole area of abortion, sterilization, and eugenics. And there's plenty of videos online, so of her in interviews talking about this. And she had a belief that children who were going to be sick or born into a very poor environment, that they should be aborted. Basically, it was eugenics, right? And similarly, black children. She was a racist as well. And in the early days, there was a hugely disproportionate number of black children being aborted by Planned Parenthood than white children, Caucasian children. Um, an awful thing. She was actually commended by the Nazis, by Goebbels, for being, a great socialist, and they took on her eugenics approach. They thought it was great, and so that's not a great kind of endorsement by any means. And even the person who followed her, this guy Alan Guttmacher, he was a president of Planned Parenthood, and then he was also vice president of the American Eugenics Society. So it was kind of running in the organization, right? Obviously, that was the ethos at the time. Now they've obviously moved on from that, but this was a very bad heritage, and to listen to this lady talk is kind of scary. The way she talks, it really is. So people should check her up online. You'll see interviews with her when she was older. She still had the same views. She talks about it very openly, and it's quite shocking. And Planned Parenthood are kind of a shocking organization. So she eventually founded International Planned Parenthood, IPPF, and that's the one that we're going to be is relevant to our discussions because they have a huge bearing on the standards we're going to talk about. So let's talk about International Planned Parenthood for a minute. So I have a copy of their report, their 21-22 report. There'll be a link to that in the description. And these are the achievements, if you can call them that. 5 million abortions in the time period of the report. 35 million kids getting comprehensive sexuality education, which is one of their huge thrusts. So abortion is one, sexuality education is another. And then they also talk about advocacy wins. And 4 of these were in Ireland, actually, interestingly enough. And we'll get to that in a few minutes as to where that came from. Because, we've had discussions in Ireland regarding the kind of the lead time for abortions and, the kind of allowing a cooling off period. And there's been all sorts of debates around that. Um, these Planned Parenthood are also a leading supplier of puberty blockers on a first visit. So within 30 minutes of a first visit, a child can be going out the door with puberty blockers from Planned Parenthood. So not great. And there's a link to, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to fit all the links because there's a huge amount of data behind these guys. But if you go checking, you'll find it. And then the Irish Family Planning Association, they're a member associate of International Planned Parenthood, and they're the people basically representing them in Ireland. So they're the voice of International Planned Parenthood in Ireland is the Irish Family Planning Association, just for people to be aware of that.
And
They lobby
Eugene,
for
just a
abortion,
piece of
etc.
news regarding puberty blockers. Many listeners may know that the NHS banned puberty blockers, the prescribing of puberty blockers, unless it's for a clinical trial. But in Ireland, it came out shortly after, in the last week or two, that Ireland will continue to prescribe them, yet the NHS determined them to be unsafe, and we don't know any long-term damage from them. So very important for Irish parents to know that they will still, at this point, be prescribed on Irish soil, although that's something that we will certainly be lobbying to have stopped.
Yeah. Well, you won't be stopping International Planned Parenthood for a while, I don't think. That's them. It's a bad heritage. We'll talk about them again because they participate in the generation of the standards. So a former member of Planned Parenthood, a former medical director, Mary Calderon. So again, she comes from that background. So remember, she was medical director for Planned Parenthood and also a follower of Kinsey. She got some money. So the relevance of the picture down below there of Hugh Hefner in the Playboy magazine, Hugh Hefner funded her to set up this group called Siecus, Sex Education for Social Change. You can see it there. So this is in America, obviously it's in the US, and she founded this organization. And again, she was big into the whole Kinsey type view, and again, believing that children are sexual from birth and all that kind of thing. She again was feeling that society was too repressive, and we needed to open up in terms of sexuality and all of that. It was basically a sex positive movement. Siecus are and closely aligned with the International Planned Parenthood in terms of their ethos. So that's what we're talking about here. They would have been the kind of the early generators of comprehensive sexuality education. So we'll see that now in a minute. And she wrote in her book there, children are sexual, think sexual thoughts, do sexual things. So that's her viewpoint. Obviously, she's following on from Kinsey's research. So this is an interesting thing. It's from one of the reports. If we have enough room, we'll stick it in the description. And it talks about, they're basically slagging off the whole notion of abstinence only sex education. And there's been a huge debate about this in the US over the years. And they're making kind of assertions here that regarding that, which I think are kind of unfounded and a little bit outrageous, to be honest, because they've got their own agenda. So you can argue this both ways, but I think this kind of shows you the mindset and the ethos. And this is so important because this is what runs through the comprehensive sexuality education. It's the ethos of Planned Parenthood. It's the ethos of Siecus that's in the guidelines. And when we look at those guidelines, we'll see where that comes through. So this is why it's important to look at the root of this. So that's a comment. And then there's this other group, World Association for Sexual Health. It used to be the World Association for Sexology, which kind of sounds kind of cultish or something, but they changed their name. These are also cited by the WHO. And they cite their kind of sexual rights declaration. So you'll hear this statement that everything, regarding sexuality education is rights-based. People keep using that term, rights-based. The rights they're talking about, there's only one right, and I'll get to it, that's linked to the United Nations human rights. All the others are rights asserted by groups like WAS and IPPF, which nobody is going to be following. You don't have to follow those rights. These people are just making statements that these are children's rights. So to quote that these are rights that you're going to be following is ridiculous. These are NGOs. They don't make rights. The United Nations do have one set of rights, and I'll talk about that and why that is relevant. So these people, they've got this statement, and they've also got a declaration of sexual pleasure. If you go on Wikipedia or you go on their website, you can find it. So again, this is the kind of organization that's influencing the sexuality guidelines. You can kind of see a theme here
So the theme is really
of the kind of people.
they believe children are sexual at birth. They believe children have rights and the rights to be sexual at a young age as long as there's consent
Yeah,
involved.
yeah, yeah. Now, this is it's a little bit of a twist, but it's kind of relevant to Ireland. Um, Kinsey's research did involve bringing in kind of pornographic material, sex toys, that kind of stuff, and that was illegal at the time. He got these concessions to bring this in, and eventually, Playboy got a concession to be able to post out Playboy in the Post, and then they got this thing called an obscenity exemption. And what this meant is that you could actually, for educational purposes, if what you were doing was for educational purposes, you could bring in, pornographic material, and you could bring it into a classroom, an educational setting, a university room, or a lecture hall, or a classroom, because it was for educational purposes. You couldn't sell it on the street. You couldn't expose it on the street, for example, but you got this exemption. And again, we'll have a link into this. To be honest, it's only in researching this that I became aware of these things. And this has been out there in the US now. I think it's been fought in different states in the US because it's done on a state basis. Now, we don't have an exemption like that in Ireland, as far as I'm aware. So, but we seem to be following the same trend for anybody who's been involved in the book situation.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, if you're calling it sex education, you can bring these books into that environment and you're good to go. And there's an example of one here. And apologies, but this is a book that's recommended for 10-year-olds.
Oh my goodness. Wow. I certainly,
Yeah,
my
right.
daughter will be
10-year-olds.
9 this summer. I certainly would not want my daughter looking at the pages from that book. Absolutely not. Wow.
Yeah,
And
this is
that's in the
probably
US
one.
at this point, Eugene. Is that right?
Yeah, I think I've seen this book referenced over here, but it's not on our recommended reading list, thank God. But
Yeah.
people could look. This is what people would term as an inclusive book. Inclusive, right? And you can see the front. If you look at the front cover, you wouldn't know. It's perfectly normal, and you wouldn't really know. But then when you get into it, it's pretty egregious. So I suppose the point here is that there was this double standard. These books, pornographic books, you could use them in a classroom and it's legal. Take them out of the classroom, they're illegal. So, and that's something they've had in the US for the last 30 years or 40 years or whatever.
Yeah, we'll be
So let's
reopening
talk
our
about the
library book
guidelines.
campaign as well, Eugene. So we'll be doing a lot more reading of some of the books because just for
Yeah,
any
yeah.
listeners, we found out that although some of the books in the children's section that were highly sexual were moved to the adult section, just for any parents listening, the children can now, with their library card, access the full adult section. So even though the books were moved to the adult section, with a
You still
library
get them.
card, those kids can now get them. So they're pushing these books any way they can into children's eyes. Yep.
Yeah. So these are the first sexuality guidelines, came from Siecus in 1990, from the K to 12, as they call it in the US, the kindergarten to 12th grade. So this was the first comprehensive sexuality guidelines. This is kind of the precedent for everything that was going to follow. And we'll try to put a link into that. They only have the latest version, but at least you'll see where it comes from. And really, Siecus and Planned Parenthood, because you saw the comment on the Planned Parenthood report about the 35 million kids that got sexuality. These are the two groups that are huge into sexuality education. It's Planned Parenthood in the US and it's International Planned Parenthood, IPPF, outside of the US. So they're the big groups pushing this. This is another one, and we'll skip through this quickly. This is important because there's another group involved here, Advocates for Youth. You can see that young, powerful taking over, right? That's the kind of tagline for Advocates for Youth. Now, Advocates for Youth are funded by the Grove Foundation, and they're an activist group. They're pure and center, a funded activist group funded by a billionaire foundation, the Grove Foundation, and that's what they are. And you'll see them involved in trans activism and other activism. Like that's what they're into. And again, they're influential. They were influential in this particular document, along with Siecus. Now, IPPF it's going to be really interesting when we look at the people who were involved in the WHO guidelines, because there was two members of IPPF, International Planned Parenthood, on the committee, but there was a lot of other people in there from member associations. So we're going to see that. This is an example of that sexuality education that you saw, and we're going to see something similar when we get into the WHO ones, just a sample page. Now, there was a UNESCO sexuality education guidelines from 2009, and there was issues with these. People had problems with them. Some of the text in them wasn't good. Now, I mean, a lot of us had problems with the WHO one as well, so we'll get into that in a minute. So these guidelines really didn't take off. They weren't adopted heavily, and they were ultimately updated in 2018. And we'll talk about that in part 2 in our next video. So just for information purposes, these do exist. They're still there. There's a link to them. But they didn't really catch on for, some of the reasons I've called out here. And to be honest, a lot of these issues still exist, even on the newer ones, but, we'll see that in due course. So here we go. The Standards for Sexuality Education in Europe. That's the link. Put that link in. You'll get this document, the English version of it, and you can start taking a look at it. This is the team that worked on it through 2008 and 2009. 19 people were involved, and we'll talk about who they were, because it's kind of important to see who they were. And these are the people who kind of created the guidelines. It's always good to kind of see the people. So this is interesting. So there were 2 people from International Planned Parenthood involved in creating the guidelines, but you'll notice there's an awful lot of people who are parts of what they call member associations of International Planned Parenthood. So if you look down through it there's actually 8 people in total who are either part of Planned Parenthood, International Planned Parenthood, or a member association. So that's quite a lot. That's a high percentage of the 19 who were essentially representing International Planned Parenthood. So that's why they're so important. That's why I kind of spent the time on doing the background. So this is the influence that you're seeing on these standards. So this is where it's kind of coming from. So let's get into it. So the document itself here talks about the sexuality education starts from birth. So it's the whole Kinsey view of that. Babies learning the value and pleasure of bodily contact, etc. So, so this is why these standards go from 0 to 4. And then they talk here about the whole, making it mandatory and removing opt-outs for sexuality education. Okay, so, that's in the WHO document. So these are quotes from the document. Anytime you see the italics here, these are direct quotes.
And one thing just I'll comment on is opt-out, Eugene, is with the new curriculum that's coming up, opting out will nearly be pointless because they're going to be all of the different subjects in school, history, art, English, Irish, will all be infiltrated with this. So if you opt out of, say, sex education, or opt out of just a piece of it you don't like, that will be irrelevant because they are going to sprinkle this through every aspect of the child's school curriculum.
Yeah, that's certainly, the areas, particularly the kind of, if I call them the inclusive kind of areas, the gender identity pieces, those elements, they'll all be everywhere, be very hard to get away from them. So they talk about cooperation with parents, but really, I don't think we've seen that in Ireland, right? So WHO talk about it here, but we haven't seen much of that going on here, and we'll get to that again. Okay, so, and we've got a constitutional support for parents on this, which isn't really being upheld. So let's go on. So it talks about, a central aspect of the human, and you'll get a theme here regarding pleasure and consent. So keep those 2 things in mind. You're going to see references to consent and pleasure appearing in the document. And that kind of, they're themes that kind of come through. So, this is again a statement, a quotation from the document, a kind of definition of sexuality, as you can see here. And it's kind of bringing in these other things. At the end of the day, these are not necessarily the most egregious elements of the document. They talk about rights here, but these are just assertions that they're making in the document. So these aren't actually rights. These don't exist as United Nations human rights or anything like that. So it's just assertions that they list in the document. Again, you're not going to really disagree with most of these because, these are all pretty benign and they're things that you would accept. Yeah, absolutely. So don't have many issues here. There's an interesting thing here, and this is interesting because of the referendum we've just had. Now, I had never seen the term intimate citizenship before, and I suspect a lot of people watching the video have never seen it before and kind of haven't a clue what it is. And there's a section in the document on this, and it's kind of just it calls it there a brief digression, and I don't know why they included this. So I did some checking, and so these are some of the references. They do give a couple of references, and this is one here. It talks about a paper, emerging arenas of public debate. They talk about test tube babies, lesbian and gay families, etc. So, okay, so they're kind of alluding to different types of families here. Okay, so what does this give you a notion of in light of the referendum we've just had? Um, this one here this is a sexuality book. It talks about metrosexuality, which isn't actually that, there's nothing major about that. Metrosexuality, actually, when you find it, is there's no big deal. Talks about transsexuality, perversions, sexual drive. So, this book kind of goes a bit further, right? So it's going into other stuff, other themes there. Um, so I kind of trying to figure out this term. So I went on to ChatGPT and asked ChatGPT to tell me about what this whole notion is of intimate citizenship. And it talks about it having its roots in feminist and queer scholarship, right? So it's coming from queer theory to a degree, right? They mentioned Judith Butler in here. Um, and then it talks about rights and entitlements. And it starts talking about intimate relationships and caregiving responsibilities. Again, this is kind of interesting in the context of the referendum we've just had. The only word they don't use in here is durable relationship, but they basically use every other word. Like, that's what they're talking about here. They're talking about alternative family types, alternative structures of family and relationships, and you recognizing those under law, recognizing them, in society, etc. So this is interesting, right? In the context of what we've just had with our referendum and the
Yeah.
two items that were up for discussion, here they are. This
Here
is where
they
it
are.
came from.
Yeah. Yeah, and I
Yeah,
believe
it's
the
here.
word durable
So
relationships was somewhere in EU law. I can't quote exactly what it was, but that specific
yeah,
term that everyone in Ireland didn't know, where it was coming from. They couldn't even define it. It was found somewhere in EU law being used. So it is out there. So there was definitely a hidden agenda that they weren't communicating to the public regarding the durable relationship piece. And it's so wonderful that 75% of the people that voted said absolutely
yeah,
not. So I think people are starting to wake up
yeah,
to this now.
yeah, yeah. And you can see it there. It seeks to challenge patriarchal and heteronormative norms. And then it talks about promoting social justice, equality, and inclusion. Now, this came from ChatGPT, which is kind of left-leaning, but it's usually pretty good for things like this. It kind of gives, it may not have all the detail that you want, but it's interesting just to see this. So let me just get something from it. Sorry. So this is the reason I put this up is because there's kind of a social justice agenda at play here. You'll start to see that, and it's kind of something that's kind of invading the documents, and I think we see it invading the actual courses in our own schools as well. So that's kind of where I've talked about this. Now, this is the only real human rights item that is valid, in my opinion. All the others are just referring to people making their own assertions of rights. This is a United Nations Article 19, talks about educational measures to protect the child, including from sexual abuse. So in this context, you could say a child needs to have sufficient knowledge to be able to be protected from sexual abuse. And I think we'd all be good with that. I think like that's fine. And so that is the rights. That's an absolute right. That's under United Nations human rights. And I think we can, but this is the only one. This is the only one, right? So there isn't rights to know about all sorts of other sorts of things, which we'll talk about when we get into the standards. And there's links there. Now, the International Planned Parenthood, they have their own rights that they state, but that's just them stating them. They're not actually United Nations rights or anything like that. So let's get into the matrix. So this is broken up by age, starting at 0 to 4. I put the page numbers here, so if you download the document and you're following along, if you've downloaded the document and you're going to follow us along with this, then these are the page numbers. So 0 to 4, I think to be honest, the 0 to 4 category is an issue from the get-go. And as we go through it, you'll kind of see it. It talks here about the body parts, body hygiene, talks about pregnancy, birth, human reproduction. I just think this is too early. to be honest, everything on the 0 to 4 category, it doesn't make sense to me. I'm sorry.
Yeah, this is
Um,
a
so
preschooler.
you'll
You
see,
know, they start preschool at age 3. So I think back to when my children were in preschool, they're barely learning the alphabet. You know, they're learning to wash their hands. They
yeah,
don't even know how to tie their shoes yet. So to talk about this
yeah,
to that level is material, I think, and content that they're certainly not ready for. Now, all body parts and functions, you know, when your little boy's 2 and he's asking, you know, what's this when he's in the tub and he's doing, you say biologically that is a penis because they're asking, but to go into all this detail in a school setting, it's not really up to the teacher. It's up to the parent if the child starts to ask the parent at home, but not for a classroom
yeah,
environment.
yeah. I think so. And again, just to maybe notice now, and I'll kind of, because we'll get into it when we talk about the UNESCO standards. UNESCO standards start at 5. They don't do a 0 to 4. And that's fine. I'm good with that. I think that's correct. So I don't know where they were going with the WHO on this. They said it. They made the statement up front that they were talking about children being sexual from birth. And that's why they have it in here. So let's go on. So we talk. The next one is one that most people is one of the most egregious ones. The whole area of the child learning to pleasure themselves and childhood masturbation. So we can see it here. And this is anybody who's looked at these. This is one of the most shocking pages from the whole thing. Talking about this. It's just not appropriate.
They're already talking,
So
Eugene. If
you
you
can
look
see
under
it.
sexuality, under skills, gain an
I know.
awareness of gender identity. They're not saying gain an
Yes,
awareness of boy versus girl, gender identity, which is a social
I
construct.
know.
And we had one of our followers messaged us there a couple of weeks ago. In Ireland, they got a letter from their preschool ahead of their child starting to say, you know, your son, you know, Tom, when he starts school, we just want to know what are his preferred pronouns? What does he identify as? They're like, it's my son Tom, he's a boy. But that was what the preschool was already asking the parents in Ireland for an
I
age
know.
3
I know.
child.
Yeah, yeah. So I think we're in bad territory. You can see the history why it's this.
Mm-hmm.
You can, at least we can understand now where this came from. But I don't think any of this is good. They talk about yes and no feelings, but again, these are really young children.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think most of this is it's just inappropriate. There shouldn't be a 0 to 4 section at all, to be honest. Different family relationships, different type of relationship, good and bad experiences.
A positive
You
attitude
know,
towards different lifestyles and their attitudes. So what does that
it's
mean?
just it's that's
Different
yeah.
lifestyles, teaching
No,
that to
I
age zero
this
to
is
4.
yeah, yeah, and you'll see that theme through this document. There's an element of social engineering going on here,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll see this huge push for this positive attitude, sex positive attitude, etc. And that's a problem, I think, that it runs through. It's a theme in these documents. And when we do the
Mm-hmm.
summaries at the end, that's one of the issues I definitely have with them. They're engaging in social engineering,
And they even have
or
the awareness
indoctrination
that
of,
relationships are diverse. So, you know, teaching age 0 to 4 about different lifestyles and diverse relationships. Whereas, you know, that's too young to be a child at that age knows they have usually in
yeah,
most situations, you know, mommy and daddy to teach them about diverse relationships. It's too much for them to get their heads around.
yeah. Now, the only exception to that, and this is where I want to reference back to the queer theory video. You may remember us talking about this in the queer theory video where there was a kind of a desire to expose children at a young age
Mm-hmm.
to sexual concepts, and
Yes.
particularly non-normative ones.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is linked to that. I think that's the influence
Absolutely.
that's come in here. Yeah. So let's move on. So sexuality and rights. You know, uh, again, it's just you're bringing up themes and things to children that are it's just beyond them, to be honest. Awareness of their rights, like
And one
0 to
thing
4 year old.
is one thing's worrying there in the italics under skills under sexuality and rights differentiate between good and bad secrets. Whereas at that age, to teach an age 4 child in preschool that there are good secrets, that's dangerous
Secrets.
territory because as a mother, you
Yeah,
teach your child
yeah.
there are no secrets from your
No
parents,
secrets.
and they're teaching a
Yeah, yeah,
child about good and bad secrets.
yeah. Absolutely. That's a very, very valid one to pick up. So again, you know, this is, I just don't think it's appropriate. And if you look at it through the three columns there,
Mm-hmm.
it's just not great. And again, when we get into the summary, there's certain themes in here which aren't good. That we'll kind of see that there's even a kind of implication with that the child, being sexual from birth. It's kind of bringing in a sexual aspect to even the relationship the child has with their parents. Which is not, you know, there's kind of an underlying theme there. We need to go through the whole lot, but that's kind of in play.
Mm-hmm.
The parents, or the Alliance, Safe Schools Alliance, actually bring that point out. And that point on the secrets is just crazy.
Yeah.
So again, now we've moved on. So we're into page 40. We've gone to 4 to 6. So it's not a huge jump in age. It's still pretty young. So these kids are still pretty young. And again, there's a different age group when you go to the UNESCO standards. They've got bigger categories and fewer of them, and they don't have the 0 to 4 range. So let's look at this one. So again, it's got the body parts. And some of this, when you get to this age, some of it depends on how it's actually handled in the classroom. And I've certainly seen material it's just overly graphic. It's just in your face, and it's not subtle, and it's too much, I would say, for a child. And it's actually showing like fully grown bodies, etc. So I think when you get into this, sometimes different parents may or may not be happy with this at this age, but it's not just what's written on the page here, it's how it's presented in the classroom is an issue, or can be an issue.
Yeah.
So
And I see I
so
see under attitudes, a positive gender identity and
gender
respect for
identity.
gender equality. So it's again that queer theory getting threaded in at age 4 to 6, which is junior infants in Ireland, or it would be kindergarten in the US. And there's also in Ireland the Children First Act of 2015. And under one of the sections, emotional abuse, it is considered emotional abuse to show a child a material that they're emotionally not ready to handle. So if we look at the Children's First Act and we look at this, and we look at some of the material going into schools and into the libraries, it's clearly emotional abuse, because my age, 4, 5, 6-year-old child is not ready to handle that emotionally. And there's also under the Children First Act of 2015, there's a sexual abuse section as well. Anyone can Google this document. It's on the TUSLA website. Is sexual abuse is showing a material to children, that sexual material, which is often done by the perpetrator during the grooming process. So you could argue that some of this is emotional and sexual abuse of the child, going against our Ireland Children First Act of 2015.
Yeah, yeah. It's just again, we're in a very young category here, 4 to 6.
Yeah.
So let me move on to 40. This is just more further down the same page. We're still on page. Again, enjoyment and pleasure when touching one's own body. Early childhood masturbation's in here as well. Um, you know, and it even gets into this, the meaning and expression of sexuality. For example, expressing feelings of love. You see, they're kind of conflating the relationship with a parent or a sibling with the sexual
Mm-hmm.
relationship. This is terrible. Like,
Yeah, and under emotions,
so
it says friendship and love towards people of the same
yeah,
sex. Well, at
yes,
age 4 to 6, they should be having a
it's
feeling of love with their
I
friends
know.
at school. They play, they do Lego. They don't have
They're
feelings of
just
love yet, except towards,
yeah, yeah,
father,
exactly.
brother, sister.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. This is an issue. They're kind of implying already that the child is same-sex attracted or something. And
Mm-hmm.
these are just children, and so I think there's problems here. And again, we're at such an age where there is an issue. Um,
And
yeah,
secret
let's
loves
move on.
and
Just talk here.
first love,
Yeah,
infatuation
yeah,
and
it's
crushes
too
age
young.
4 to 6. That's too young. Like at that age, they just
Too young.
go to school and play and pretend they're Spider-Man or Superman, or play with, dolls.
Yeah,
They don't
yeah,
have
yeah.
crushes at age 4 to 6.
Uh, and you've got it here. Consolidate their gender identity. You know. So
That's the queer theory from
again,
video 1. So if anyone listening,
yeah,
just remember to
yeah.
go back to that first video on queer theory. This is absolutely, I'm seeing it through this document as well.
Yeah, yeah. It's so we'll move on. So this is again 4 to 6, relationships and lifestyles, friendships, same-sex relationships, right? It's here. Um, Different kinds of family. Um, you know, with which is fine. But again, do you need to bring this stuff into the classroom? I never remember having that discussion or even needing to have that discussion at this age. So, acceptance of diversity. I
A
mean, the
4-year-old
children
wouldn't even know
they
what the
just
word diversity. They don't
they
know
don't even know. They
diversity.
just play with
They
each
just
other,
go and
right?
have fun with their friends. They just want to play at
They do.
school.
They don't know. They don't know. They'll play with every child. It doesn't matter, the child beside them, they're just going to play with them. So
Mhm.
it's strange. It's bringing in themes that are not appropriate for the age group, to be honest. It's just
And another thing is
sexuality and
it's
health.
pointing
Yeah,
out differences to children that a child at that age,
yeah.
my kids have friends who are black and white and everything in between, and they never come home and say, "Gosh, there was a child with different skin color." To a child doesn't they don't even see the differences. They play with everyone. They have fun. They have friends. So it's bringing differences in that an age 4 to 6 year old probably wouldn't and doesn't need
Oh
to
yeah.
know about yet because they're born full, they're born kind, they're born,
Yeah, yeah.
considerate of other people.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, what are you going to do? You're going to start talking about white privilege or something next?
Yeah, exactly. That's
Like,
coming as well.
I'm
Critical
serious because
race
that's what.
theory.
Yeah, that like because I think that's the kind of thing that we're going to talk about. I mean, look at this. There's a comment down here again, another one that I find, you find them throughout the document. If experience feeling is not good, you do not always have to comply. What? What does that mean? Like, that's a
Yeah.
really strange comment.
That is really strange. That's the one I was talking to someone about the other day. So if
Yeah.
it feels good, you don't have to tell mommy or daddy. So an adult meets with your child, maybe, abuses them, touches them, but as long as it feels good, they don't always have to tell mommy or daddy. I mean, this is really setting a child up for a sexual relationship with an adult. This is based on, it looks to me like a pedophile playbook. And I mean that's the only way to describe it here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I mean, the next column talks about, trust their instincts, apply the three-step model, say no, go away. Like that's so this is strange. I don't understand this one.
In age 4 to 6,
And
they don't
then
really
the
have
achieve
instincts
feelings.
yet. If a creepy person comes
No,
onto
they
your
don't.
child, whatever, they're
Yeah.
not going to have that gut instinct. They don't have
It,
that at age four to
no,
six.
it's black and white.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you can't, yeah. Awareness of risks. So again, some strange things here, sexuality and rights. I suppose they're trying to talk about the abuse aspect, right? This would be linked back to the Article 19, the United Nations Article 19 regarding children having sufficient education to be able to, offset abuse. So you could relate this one back to that. It's probably not the worst, but it's again this gender, cultural, age differences, right?
Mhm.
See that point there?
Yeah.
Again bringing in differences. At 4 to 6, you shouldn't be doing that. I just think that's crazy. Um, the children at that age are colorblind. They're gender blind. They're,
Hmm.
every that's just the way they are.
Yeah.
So you don't need to start creating problems where there aren't
No.
any. So yeah, yeah. So you can take a look through some of the other ones there. I mean, they're trying to
It
bring
steals a
out some
child's
different stuff.
innocence. At age 4 to 6, they want to go in the
It
sand
is,
pit.
it
They want to
is.
go run in the field. They want to fly a kite and they're learning to ride a
Yeah,
bicycle between 4 to 6. Let them have their childhood. We have one shot at
yeah,
childhood to get it right. One shot. Let's not steal the innocence of these age 4 to 6 children. Let them have that very short childhood. It goes by in the
100%.
blink of an eye.
Yeah. And look, there's a comment over there on the bottom right there. Respect for different norms regarding sexuality. 4 to 6. Like it's just crazy. It's yeah. There's just a fundamental issue here with regard to some
Mhm.
of this stuff. Well, I think the age groups are a problem anyway. All of this stuff is too young. Again, let's look on to the next one. 6 to 9. So we're moving on a bit in age. Page 42 for people who are following. Um, again, it's just bringing in 6-year-olds talking about some of this stuff, menstruation,
Contraception, age six to
ejaculation.
nine. I can't imagine a 6 to 9 year old learning about
I know,
contraception.
I know.
Hello, age
Cho
6. Here's a condom. I mean,
choices about
why?
parenthood.
Why?
Yeah, yeah, choices about parenthood at 6 to 9. It's just crazy. Um, I don't know. This is just, well, I suppose it's Planned Parenthood, right?
Hmm.
There was 8 people from International Planned Parenthood or associates involved in creating this, right?
Yeah.
Um, no,
And
it's
six to
not
nine,
appropriate.
it's
It just
talking about
isn't.
menstruation and ejaculation and all of that. But I don't think age 6 to 9 girls are getting their menstrual cycle at that age. I mean,
No,
that's too
it's too
young.
early.
Why would they need to even know about that at this point?
Yeah, and this is actually you'll see it that there is an argument, that children are getting they're passing through into adolescence, they're earlier, etc. Are going through puberty at an earlier age, and hence you've got to educate every child in the class then to be ahead of that. That's kind of an argument that I've seen. I just think at 6 to 9, I just think
Mm.
it's just not appropriate.
Oh, look at
So
this one. Sex in the media, including the internet for age 6 to 9. So 6 to 9 they're going to teach them about sex in the media, including the
they
internet, like
well
pornography
they
for
shouldn't
age
have a
six to
mobile phone,
nine.
right? They shouldn't be accessing any of this stuff. Yeah, yeah,
No.
that's 100%. Um,
Sex in the media.
you know,
Why would
uh,
age 6 need to know about
deal
sex
with
in the
sex in the
media?
media. Yeah, this is like porn literacy, right?
Oh, look at the
That's
emotions, the difference between friendship, love, and lust.
and
Why
lust.
would age 6 to 9 need to learn about lust?
Yeah, yeah. It's you can see the problem, right? The ethos here is not good, and we've seen where this originated. Goes right back to the founders of these Siecus and IPPF.
We're
Unfortunately,
at
that's
about
just
1 hour,
permeated.
Eugene. Do we want to go through one more age section and then
Well,
do?
we'll get through the next. I think that when they get older, they get easier because it's not as
Yeah.
egregious. So let's move through these ones. Different relationships, diseases, relation to sexuality. Again, I think that it's just too young. It's just 6 to 9.
Where is the disease? Let's see. Diseases is under. Oh, I see it there under
Yeah,
sexuality.
sexuality,
So
health,
age
and
six
well-being.
to
Yeah,
nine. Let's talk about sexually transmitted diseases. Great.
it's just yeah.
And
They're
sexual
they're out of
violence and
kilter with
aggression. I mean, that would if a
yeah
6 to 9 year old started getting talked to about sexual violence and aggression, that is too much for age 6 and 9. I mean, that's
yeah
just
yeah yeah
that could terrify a
yeah
little
yeah.
child.
It's just we can see it at every age group. Everything, it's not appropriate, right? It's not age
No.
appropriate. There's no doubt about that. Um, yeah, let's it's people can take a look at that. We'll try to speed through this because I know we're taking some time here. But again, sexuality and rights. Again, it's getting into sexual rights of children now, right? Right to sexuality information, and then there's certain information they have a right to, and there's certain information that they
Mhm.
don't. They're still 6 to 9, right?
Yeah.
So,
Age six to
um,
nine doesn't really
so
have name their rights,
yeah,
sexual rights. They shouldn't have sexual rights at age 6 to 9. I'm sorry, that's
six
far
to
under
nine.
the age of 6 to 9.
I know,
That is
I
so
know, I
far
know.
under the
Well,
age of consent.
it's so far off. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So again, let's skip on. So now I suppose 44. We're into 9 to 12. So we're getting a little bit more reasonable now in terms of covering some of these items. Um, so I think it's probably a little bit less egregious here. In terms of some of the items.
There's one in this
I kind of
section
get
that I saw that was talking
yeah,
about first sexual experience at age 9. I'm just trying to see if
yeah.
it's on this slide here.
We'll probably get onto that.
Maybe on the
Um, Again, we're getting into contraception again, obviously, family planning, um, understanding relationship between menstruation, ejaculation for using condoms, etc. So we're into, and I think you're getting into 9 is too young, clearly, for that. The 12 is different. I think you're into a different situation when you get to 12. So I think the age categories aren't good. They're just bad. The age categories in the WHO document are just bad overall. They're
Mhm.
better in the UNESCO one when we look at it, but there's other issues there. But they're in general, I think they're better. So let's move on. So first sexual experience, you mentioned it,
Yeah.
Jana, it's here. Your gender
So for
orientation,
anyone
sexual
listening on the
behavior.
call, just have a question for yourself. If you're a parent, are you happy with your age 9-year-old child talking about their learning about their first sexual experience at age 9.
Yep.
No.
Yep. Yeah, it's just a bit. Yeah, it's just not right.
And under
It's different at
skills,
12. I think you get.
under
Yeah,
sexuality, they're under skills, top column there in the middle. Make a conscious decision to have sexual
have sexual
experiences or
experience.
not. So at age 9, you need to make a conscious decision whether to have sex or not. No, age 9 shouldn't be having sex at all.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's kind of, and the next one is saying refuse unwanted sexual experiences, like as if, there's ones
But
that
if
you
it's
want and there's
wanted, it's
ones you don't
okay.
want.
So refuse unwanted. But if you
Yeah,
want it, that's okay.
yeah, that's okay. And there's a kind of a theme here, right? So, you'll see it, and it gets to the whole area of consent, and it's that the children would have enough knowledge at an early enough stage to consent. Now, it's not on, to be honest. Like it's you can see it. It's a theme in this document overall. Um, so it's a concern, right? This just everything here is out of kilter age wise in terms of appropriateness.
And
I
just a
would be
reminder for
saying.
everyone, the name of the document is WHO Standards of Sexuality. So this is the World Health
Yep.
Organization, what they feel that children should be educated on by age. And just another reminder is that the WHO treaty they want to ratify in May, and Ireland, Stephen Donnelly, our health minister, has already said that Ireland is a friend of the treaty and we will be signing it. So if the treaty is signed, it gives the WHO even more power to tell schools what they need to educate the children on. And if this is their document, this is their playbook.
Yep.
Scary. That should terrify any mother or father.
Oh yeah. And again, it's just
Free
it's just
choice of
unbalanced if you
partner. Am
look
I
at all the
reading that?
items here.
Am I reading that right? Free choice of partner under attitudes for age 9 to 12, a positive attitude to gender equality in relationships,
Yeah.
and free choice of partner. Most 9-year-olds wouldn't really
You
have a
shouldn't be.
partner at that point.
No, no. There's definitely a notion here of children having sexual experiences in their early teens. That's definitely a theme in both documents.
Mm,
It kind of
mhm.
just been taken that that's what they should be doing. So yeah, unfortunately. So we'll skip on. This is again sexual rights coming up here, and see there they reference IPPF
I
and
see that.
BIWAS.
Yes.
We saw those two organizations. They're just NGOs, right? You're not going to follow there are no rights associated with them. So this is crazy, right? Because you hear this term, and I've heard it from the Department of Education, rights-based,
Yeah. Rights of a
evidence-based.
child. And in some countries are trying to get between the child and parent to say the child has rights and you as the parent
Yep,
must step
yep,
aside.
yep,
Your child has a right
correct.
to change their sex. Your child has a right to do X, Y, and Z. And in this case, your child has a right at age 9 to have sex, and you as a parent can't say anything about it.
Yeah. Now, the other point I think it's worth making, and I kind of made it at the start as we go through this material and we find issue with all of this stuff. Can you imagine what the classroom material looks like for some of these?
It's probably
How
why they want to
inappropriate
give
that
free.
is.
It's probably why they're giving free books. So the companies
Yeah,
producing school books, the school purchases the books. They're free. Those book companies aren't putting them in bookstores, and the books will stay locked up in the locker at school. They won't be home in the backpack. So
correct.
unless parents are being informed by videos like this or our leaflets that we're going to pass out or live events, they may never see those books that are teaching the children this, or in some cases, it may not even be in the book that the child has. It may be just in the teacher's lesson plan. So again, hiding information from parents.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, we'll get to that at the end when we do the summary. So you can, so we'll skip through because I'm conscious of the time. Um, now we're into an older age group, 12 to 15, right? So we're getting some of the stuff becomes less egregious at this stage. But there's been too much happening before this, I guess, is part of the issue. Um, Again, obviously, contraceptions is being talked about here, pregnancy. Some of this is understandable in the context of the age group. Um, so I think there's probably less of an issue, but there's a sex positive theme continues to run through this, you'll see that as it comes out.
It's
And
interesting,
look at the
Eugene, in the
critical
top,
thing.
it's interesting in the
Yeah,
top left under human body and human development, it talks about body
I was
knowledge,
just going to
body
make that
image,
comment.
talks about genital mutilation. So are they talking about it as if it's a negative thing? And if that's the case, why are they pushing the trans agenda, which promotes the mutilation of boys and girls? That's very interesting how they'll
I,
present it here.
I know, and no, there is a kind of a difference. This is for Europe, so the female genital mutilation is not really a European issue, though you may have migrants, for example, conducting it, right? That's where it can affect Europe. When we look at the UNESCO document, it's a lot more global. So, Africa, you've got underage marriage. You've got forced marriages, things like that. You've got the genital mutilation. So we'll see those themes come out more in the UNESCO document than here. But there's an interesting one up there, critical thinking related to body modification. It's just italicized. It isn't actually highlighted yet. But you look at the top right-hand corner there, which is kind of an interesting one. So I think some of this is less egregious. Albeit there's some themes that are run through the entire document that are more of a concern. Let's look at this one here. Gender differences, gender identity, and sexual orientation.
That's already in the junior
You
cycle.
know,
So just to point out for
uh,
listeners in
I
Ireland,
know.
age 12 is the junior cycle, and they're already being taught in school that they can be a boy, girl, neither or both, regardless of their sex assigned at birth. So that gender ideology was pushed back on by thousands. I think there were over 4,000 submissions from parents. Thousands of parents were pushing back on this. It still went into junior cycle. So for children in Ireland, age 12 to 15 in junior cycle, they are already, as of last September 2023, they are being taught gender ideology as a fact.
Yeah, yeah, it's there. Again, you see the first sexual experience, the friendship, love, and lust. When we saw that in the earlier ones, which was kind of crazy. And pleasure, you'll see the notion of pleasure coming through quite a bit. Um, again, the sex positive pleasure, sex for pleasure, as opposed to sex as part of an actual meaningful relationship. That's kind of a general issue that you get through these documents. Um, let's move on because again, we're kind of tight on time. Influences of age, gender, religion, etc. Yeah, absolutely, there will be differences. This is again, this is not there isn't a lot on this because it's quite only a small amounts are highlighted, so it's probably again not the worst.
And what does the highlighting mean, Eugene,
Sexual.
versus the ones that aren't highlighted in
Well, the
italics?
highlighting would be the ones that are darkened, like have got the highlighting. They're the main themes for this
Okay.
age group, and then there's kind of optional. The stuff that's not highlighted is kind of
Okay.
optional. You might bring it in, you may not. Um, that's kind of the overall. There's a key. So when you look at the document, you'll see the key actually to
Okay.
these. But the ones we're looking at here, the ones that are in bold text with highlighting, are the main themes that you want to do. So again, sexual rights, they bring that up an awful lot through the document. Like they probably overplay it. Well, I think it's just too much. It's just appearing too much, in my opinion. Let's move on now. So again, for page 48. So again, we can look at the human body. Again, this is probably less of an issue with some of these
And
because
body
you're
image,
into an older
I'm
age.
seeing on the top
Yeah,
left, second bullet down on the top left, body
yeah,
knowledge, body image, and body modification. What they should be teaching in
yeah.
school is have a positive body
No,
image.
yeah,
Everyone's born different. You're born right.
yeah,
Nature makes no
yeah,
mistakes. But unfortunately, in the schools here in Ireland, and I know it's happening all across the West, is they're teaching children they may be born in the wrong body and they should modify their body and get a transition to a different gender. So the
yeah,
body image is actually important and positive, but it's teaching children to have a positive body image and love how they're born, not try to change
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. So let's just, if we stick just to the highlighted ones, I guess. We talked about, surrogacy here, medical assisted reproduction. I don't know that they necessarily need to be covering it at this stage. Negotiation skills in terms of negotiating with with a partner or potential partner. It's just a few things there that that are a bit off. But we're getting into, I suppose, less egregious territory in general, but still, it's that the overall ethos is what's not that healthy, I guess, is probably the main issue here.
It's a lot of
Meaning of
pleasure.
sex at different
I'm seeing the
ages.
word pleasure a lot in here.
Yeah,
So
pleasure comes through big time as you go through it, and it's the same in the UNESCO document.
I wonder what the topic
Talking
is
about
on
prostitution
transactional
here,
sex. That's interesting. So they're teaching age 15 about
prostitution, yeah,
transactional sex and prostitution, getting small gifts for having
yeah,
sex.
yeah,
I mean, I wonder what the
yeah,
context
yeah,
is that they're teaching that. And that's
yeah,
just teaching 15-year-old about prostitution seems a little bit not appropriate for their
yeah,
age.
yeah. No, and I think any of us who've seen the school books will have seen some of the items that are called out
Hmm.
here. We'll have seen them as exercises in the current SPHE books.
Hmm.
I've definitely seen ones here related to quite a number of items actually on this page. And then that positive attitude towards sexuality and pleasure, again on the top right-hand corner. So we're nearly done. Gender role behavior, unfairness, discrimination, inequality, openness, etc. So, and let's move through here. So sexual, the healthcare systems, risky behavior. Um, Again, it's probably, there's less issues when you get to the older age groups, obviously. There just is, apart from
This
the,
looks
say,
a
the
little
underlying
milder
ethos.
than some of the library books that we've seen here in Ireland. So it's talking about in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
top
It
left
actually doesn't
risky sexual
when
behavior and the impact it has. But in the library books here in Ireland, we're seeing some really dangerous adult fetishes
I
being
know,
pushed
I
in front
know,
of children's eyes. So
I know. That's the
it's
problem.
even worse than
That's
the
the problem.
WHO document.
So, social, cultural, social boundaries, community sense. It's I have less of an issue. The only point I'd make, I guess, is that there's a bit of a kind of a social justice agenda in these documents. They're going beyond they call themselves comprehensive sexuality education because they go beyond the basic sex education. And the same with SPHE, social, personal health.
Mhm.
So they're kind of bringing in other themes, and we'll get to that in the summary in part two of this. So that's kind of the main stuff there. I got ChatGPT to give me a critique of the WHO document, and this is what it came up with. Um, and it says, there's a few issues: cultural sensitivity, the diversity doesn't fully adequately cover it, which is interesting. Age appropriateness, definitely an issue, huge issue, particularly at the younger age groups. It talks about not being fully inclusive. I think there's some categories, like, for example, autistic children, for example, aren't taken account of. Children that may have emotional challenges, for example. I don't think that's fully factored in. Whatever about LGBTQ and other disabilities. There's more here. So implementation challenges. That's just there's resistance, and there is resistance because of some of the issues with the material. And then political, conservative, religious, political groups, etc. And again, not surprising given some of the material that's appeared. So this is ChatGPT's view of the world. We'll cover our view of the world in the next video, which will have an awful lot more substance to it than ChatGPT. ChatGPT is a bit high level, a little bit woolly, and we'll be a bit more specific, and we'll get into it in more detail. Just for anybody, if you want to take a book about sexuality education, there's a very good book by Miriam Grossman. It's 10 years old now. It's kind of framed in the context of the US and Siecus and Planned Parenthood, but it's the same stuff. Irish parents are getting exposed to this now, what Dr. Miriam Grossman talks about in this book. And I would highly recommend it because she covers some really practical information for people who've got teenage kids, teenage girls in particular. So well worth taking a look at that. This is part two. We'll go into next week, the UNESCO ones, and then we'll do our critique of the two, and then we'll tie it off with, relating it to our own system here, SPHE and RSE, and what we're seeing on the ground in the books, in the classroom, etc. So
Yeah,
that'll
I
be
think
next week.
that's really good
Apologies,
because a lot of parents that we speak to, Eugene, like that email us or we speak to at live events or when we're doing leaflets or whatnot, they say, where is this coming from? I, as a parent, I wasn't consulted, or even teachers. We have a few hundred teachers in our network with the Irish Education Alliance. Teachers are saying they weren't consulted. I've talked to school principals, they weren't consulted. Parents weren't consulted. So it's like the €1,000,000 question is, where is it coming from? So it's really good just to remind everyone, the very first video that we did, which is on the Natural Women's Council YouTube channel, the first video touches a helicopter view of the queer theory. This one kind of talks about the UNESCO and WHO, or more WHO, and then it's how it drills down to how did it get in Irish schools. And people will clearly see that this is not driven by the bottom up. This is not a grassroots movement. It is not really about including people. It's not really because Irish children were bullied in school. This is being driven from the very top down into our schools. And we'll see that the political activists have been planted throughout academia. So on the next part, we did part 1 a couple of weeks ago, part 2 tonight. On the next part, which is part 2 of this, we'll see really how academia in Ireland has been infiltrated by these political activists without any parental or teacher involvement.
Yeah, and it didn't really come up today, but there's kind of postmodernism, right? The whole concept of postmodernism, which just plays into the whole gender identity stuff as well. That kind of comes up in the UNESCO standards a bit more, and that's definitely in play in terms of our curriculum for sure. There's a kind of a postmodern ethos coming through, and we'll talk about that more in part 2.
Excellent. Great. Well, thanks very much. We'll stop recording now and we'll get this one out, and then we'll do part 2 next week.
Yep.